This is insane HOA madness, and the timeline is absurd. I am standing on my driveway when the tow truck pulls up and the driver steps out holding a clipboard with my name already written on it. I have not met this man before. He nods like we are old friends and says he got a call about a violation vehicle at this address. I tell him I just parked here an hour ago and there is no violation. He shrugs and taps the clipboard. Nancy Walker is already walking across the street from the HOA office cluster with her rolling file cart rattling behind her on the pavement. She is wearing a white windbreaker and a reflective safety vest like she works for the county. She stops 3 feet from me and plants her feet. I am not debating you. I am issuing the notice. I work as a mailroom supervisor at a corporate office. I hate chaos. I moved into Willow Creek Estates 2 months ago because the rent was cheaper than downtown Spokane, and I thought a quiet neighborhood would be a relief after years of apartment drama. I was wrong. Nancy is the board secretary, and she controls every piece of paperwork that moves through this place. The rolling file cart is her signature prop. She uses it to haul violation notices, compliance templates, and certification binders to every enforcement scene like she is setting up a mobile courtroom. Right now, she is flipping through a stack of laminated policy sheets clipped to the top of the cart. She pulls one sheet free and waves it at me. This is the parking addendum. Rear-end parking only. You are front-end. That is a safety violation. The tow is authorized. I look at my car. I am parked front-end because the driveway slopes and I did not want to roll backward into the street when I leave for work. I tell her I read the rules packet when I moved in and there was no mention of rear-end parking. She smiles and taps the laminated sheet. This was updated last month. Check your portal. I pull out my phone and open the HOA portal. The parking addendum is listed, but when I click it, the page fails to load. I try again. Same result. Nancy leans in and says the portal is working fine for everyone else. Maybe you should check your internet. The tow driver is watching this with his arms crossed. I ask him if he has a copy of the authorization. He glances at Nancy and she nods. He walks back to his truck and pulls a folder from the passenger seat. Inside is a single sheet with the Willow Creek Estates logo at the top and a handwritten note that says front-end violation, immediate tow authorized, signed N. Walker. No date, no timestamp, no reference number. I take a photo of it with my phone before he can pull it away. Nancy steps between us and tells the driver to proceed. I tell the driver I am not moving my car, and if he hooks it without proper notice, I will file a complaint with his company. He hesitates. Nancy raises her voice. This is an HOA matter, and you are interfering with enforcement. Smile. I am documenting this for the file. She pulls a small camera from her vest pocket and aims it at me. The gate technician with a tool bag is walking up the sidewalk and stops to watch. Nancy does not acknowledge him. She keeps the camera pointed at my face and narrates into it like she is recording a deposition. Subject is refusing compliance. Subject is obstructing tow operations. Subject is creating a hostile environment. I stay quiet because I know anything I say will be clipped and replayed out of context. The tow driver shifts his weight and looks at his watch. He tells Nancy he needs authorization on company letterhead or he cannot proceed. Nancy snaps at him. I am the board secretary. This is my authorization. He shakes his head. Company policy says I need a printed work order with a case number. Nancy's face goes red. She slams the file cart handle and tells him to wait while she prints a new order. She storms back toward the office cluster. The tow driver looks at me and mutters that this happens every time she calls. I ask him what he means. He says Nancy has called his company 4 times in the last 6 months for emergency tows, and 3 of those calls got canceled when the vehicle owner showed up with proof of compliance. He says his dispatcher told him to start requiring written authorization because Nancy keeps trying to skip the process. I ask him if he remembers any of the other addresses. He pulls out his phone and scrolls through his call log. He reads off 3 street names. All of them are in Willow Creek Estates. All of them are within 2 blocks of my unit. I take notes. Nancy comes back 10 minutes later with a printed work order on Willow Creek Estates letterhead. The work order lists my address, my car make and model, and the violation code P14, which she says is front-end parking. The case number is blank. The signature line has her name, but no date. I take another photo. The tow driver reads it and shakes his head again. He tells Nancy the case number field is required and he cannot process a tow without it. Nancy jabs a finger at the paper. The case number is not your concern. Your concern is removing this vehicle. The driver folds the paper and hands it back to her. He tells her to call his office if she wants to escalate, but he is not hooking the car without proper documentation. He gets back in his truck and drives away. Nancy turns to me and her voice drops to a hiss. You think you won. You did not. I am filing a hearing notice, and you will be fined for obstruction. The hearing is in 3 days. You will receive formal notice by certified mail. I ask her what I am being charged with. She says obstruction of enforcement operations and failure to comply with a lawful tow order. I tell her the tow was not lawful because the driver refused it. She smiles. I do not need proof. I have paperwork and vibes. She wheels the file cart back toward the office, and I am left standing in my driveway with the gate technician still watching from the sidewalk. I go inside and pull up the HOA portal on my laptop. The parking addendum still will not load. I try the contact page and submit a records request for the full parking policy revision history. The request confirmation says I will receive a response within 5 business days. I screenshot everything. Then I call the management company listed on my lease. The receptionist transfers me to a property manager named Diane. I explain the situation, and she listens without interrupting. When I finish, she sighs and says Nancy has been flagged before for overreach, but the board always backs her because she keeps meticulous records. I ask her what that means. She says Nancy documents everything in triplicate, and she has a filing system that makes it nearly impossible to challenge her in a hearing because she can produce a paper trail for anything. I ask if the management company has access to the portal logs. She says they do, but they would need a formal audit request from the board or a legal subpoena to release them. I thank her and hang up. Then I drive to the Spokane County Recorder office. I request copies of all HOA lien filings for Willow Creek Estates over the last 2 years. The clerk hands me a stack of 15 documents. I sit in the lobby and go through them one by one. 12 of the liens are for unpaid dues. 3 are for violation fines that escalated to liens after the homeowner failed to pay. All 3 of those homeowners live within 3 blocks of me. One of them is the address the tow driver mentioned. I take photos of every page. When I get home, there is a certified mail notice taped to my door. I drive to the post office and pick up the envelope. Inside is a hearing notice on Willow Creek Estates letterhead. The hearing is scheduled for 3 days from now at 6 p.m. in the clubhouse. The notice lists 3 charges: front-end parking violation, obstruction of enforcement, and failure to maintain portal compliance. The last charge is new. I read it twice. Failure to maintain portal compliance means I did not update my contact information or check for policy updates. The notice says the fine for all 3 charges combined is $1,200, and if I do not attend the hearing, the fine will double and a lien will be filed. I call Diane again and ask if failure to maintain portal compliance is a real violation. She pauses and says it is listed in the master rules, but she has never seen it enforced. She says it is usually used as a tack-on charge when someone is already in violation of something else. I ask her if Nancy has used it before. She says she would have to check the records, but she remembers at least 2 cases in the last year where it appeared on a hearing notice. I ask her for the names. She says she cannot release that information without a formal request. I thank her and hang up. That night I go door to door in my neighborhood. I knock on 8 units. 5 people answer. 3 of them recognize me from the tow scene. One of them is a retired postal worker named Frank. He invites me in and makes coffee. I ask him if he has ever had trouble with the HOA. He laughs and says everyone has trouble with the HOA. He tells me Nancy has been board secretary for 4 years, and in that time the violation rate has tripled. He says the board meetings used to be quiet, but now they are packed because people are fighting fines and liens. He says Nancy always wins because she brings the file cart and she can produce a document for anything. I ask him if he has ever challenged her. He says he did once. He got a hearing notice for a trash can violation, and he went to the hearing with photos proving the trash can was inside his garage. Nancy pulled out a compliance log that showed his garage door was open for more than 2 hours on the day of the violation. She said an open garage door with a visible trash can counts as a curb violation. The board voted to uphold the fine. Frank paid it because fighting it would have cost more in legal fees. I ask him if he knows anyone else who fought a fine and lost. He gives me 2 names. One of them moved out 6 months ago. The other is still in the neighborhood. I knock on her door the next morning. Her name is Carla. She is a nurse who works night shifts. She answers the door and scrubs and looks exhausted. I explain who I am and why I am asking. She lets me in. She tells me Nancy hit her with a landscaping violation last year. The notice said her front yard had unauthorized decorative rocks. Carla says the rocks were there when she moved in, and they are listed in the original landscaping plan filed with the county. She went to the hearing with a copy of the plan. Nancy said the plan was outdated, and the new landscaping guidelines prohibit decorative rocks larger than 6 inches. Carla asked to see the new guidelines. Nancy pulled a binder from the file cart and showed her a page that said decorative rock maximum size 6 inches. Carla asked when the guidelines were updated. Nancy said they were updated 2 years ago and posted on the portal. Carla checked the portal and the guidelines were not there. Nancy said Carla must have missed a notification email. Carla never received an email. The board voted to uphold the fine. Carla paid it and removed the rocks. I asked Carla if she kept any of the documents from the hearing. She says she kept everything. She goes to her home office and comes back with a folder. Inside is the hearing notice, the landscaping plan, and a printed copy of the email notification log from the portal. The log shows no emails were sent to her address about the guideline update. I take photos of everything. Carla asks me what I am planning to do. I tell her I am not sure yet, but I think Nancy is running a scheme, and I am going to prove it. The next day, I get a call from the management company. It is not Diane. It is her supervisor. He introduces himself as Greg and says he needs to discuss my records request. I ask him what the problem is. He says the records request I submitted was flagged by the board as frivolous, and they have instructed the management company to deny it. I ask him on what grounds. He says the board cited Section 12 of the HOA bylaws, which allows them to deny records requests that are deemed to be for improper purposes. I ask him what improper purposes means. He says the board believes I am trying to gather information to harass board members. I tell him that is absurd, and I am gathering information to defend myself at a hearing. He says the board's decision is final, and if I want to appeal, I need to submit a written appeal to the board within 10 days. I ask him if the management company agrees with the board's decision. He pauses and says the management company is required to follow board directives. I ask him if he personally thinks the request was frivolous. He does not answer. I thank him and hang up. Then I call an attorney. I find a local real estate lawyer named Angela who offers a free consultation. I meet her in her office downtown. I bring printouts of everything: the hearing notice, the tow authorization, the lien documents, Carla's folder, Frank's story, and the denied records request. Angela goes through it all and takes notes. When she finishes, she leans back and says Nancy is running a classic paper trail scam. She says Nancy is creating violations after the fact and backdating documents to make it look like proper notice was given. She says the fact that the portal is failing to load policies and the records request was denied suggests Nancy is covering her tracks. Angela says I have enough to file a complaint with the Washington State Attorney General's office for HOA fraud, but it will take months to investigate. She says the faster option is to go to the hearing and force Nancy to produce her evidence on the record. If Nancy cannot produce valid timestamps or proof of notification, Angela says, I can file a motion to dismiss in small claims court and sue for costs. If you are enjoying this story, hit that like button and subscribe for more. I ask Angela what the chances are that I win. She says it depends on how good Nancy's forgeries are. I ask her what she means by forgeries. She says if Nancy is backdating documents, she is committing fraud, and if I can prove it, the board will be forced to reverse the fines or risk legal liability. Angela says the key is forcing Nancy to show her work. She says I need to ask for metadata, creation dates, email headers, and portal logs. If Nancy refuses or produces documents that do not match the timeline, she will trap herself. I ask Angela how much it will cost to hire her for the hearing. She says she charges $200 an hour and the hearing will probably take 2 hours. I do not have $400 to spare, but I tell her I will think about it. That night I get an email from the HOA portal. The subject line says your portal access has been suspended. I open it. The email says my account was flagged for suspicious activity and my access has been temporarily disabled pending a security review. The email is signed by Nancy Walker, board secretary. I screenshot it and forward it to Angela. She replies within 10 minutes. She says this is retaliation and it strengthens my case. She says I should forward the email to the management company and demand that my access be restored immediately. I do. Greg replies the next morning and says the board has the authority to suspend portal access for security reasons, and the suspension will remain in place until the hearing. I spend the rest of the day preparing. I print every photo I took at the recorder's office. I print Carla's documents. I print the email suspension notice. I organize everything into a binder with tabs. I write a timeline of events starting with the tow attempt and ending with the portal suspension. I practice my opening statement in front of the mirror. I sound calm. I sound reasonable. I sound like someone who is about to get railroaded. The hearing is at 6 p.m. I arrive at the clubhouse at 5:45. The parking lot is half full. I recognize a few cars from my neighborhood. Inside the clubhouse, the main room has been set up with a long table at the front and rows of folding chairs facing it. Nancy is already there with the file cart parked next to her chair. She is wearing the same white windbreaker and reflective vest. The other board members are sitting at the table. A man in his 60s who introduces himself as the president, a woman in her 50s who is the treasurer, and a younger man who is the vice president. Nancy is at the far end of the table with the file cart within arm's reach. There are about 15 people in the audience. I recognize Frank and Carla. I sit in the front row. The president calls the meeting to order and reads the charges against me. Front-end parking violation, obstruction of enforcement, failure to maintain portal compliance. He asks me if I am ready to present my defense. I stand and walk to the front. I place the binder on the table and open it to the first tab. I say I am here to challenge the validity of these charges, and I have evidence that the violations were fabricated. Nancy interrupts. She says the hearing is not a trial, and I am not allowed to make accusations against board members. The president tells her to let me speak. I continue. I say the parking violation notice was issued without proper documentation. I show the photo of the handwritten tow authorization with no date or case number. I say the tow driver refused to proceed because the authorization did not meet company standards. Nancy interrupts again. She says the tow driver was misinformed and the authorization was valid. I ask her to produce the case number. She pulls a sheet from the file cart and slides it across the table. The sheet has a case number printed at the top. The case number is P142739. I take a photo of it with my phone. Then I pull out my phone and show the photo I took of the original work order. The case number field is blank. I ask Nancy when the case number was added. She says it was added after the tow driver requested it. I ask her to provide the creation date of the document. She says the creation date is not relevant. I turn to the president and ask him if the board requires case numbers for tow authorizations. He looks at Nancy. She says case numbers are an internal tracking tool and they are not required for enforcement. I ask him if the board has a written policy on tow authorizations. He says the policy is in the enforcement manual. I ask to see the manual. Nancy pulls a binder from the file cart and flips to a page. She holds it up. The page has a section titled Tow Authorization Procedure. I ask if I can see the binder. She hands it to me. I flip to the front cover. The binder has a label that says Enforcement Manual Revised November 2024. I take a photo. Then I flip to the tow authorization page. The page has a footer with a date, November 18th, 2024. I point to the footer and ask Nancy when the manual was last updated. She says November 2024. I ask her when my tow authorization was issued. She says January 7th, 2025. I ask her how the tow authorization could comply with a manual that was revised after the tow attempt. She does not answer. The treasurer interrupts and says the manual revision date is a typo. I ask her how she knows. She glances at Nancy. Nancy says the manual was revised in November 2023 and the footer was updated incorrectly when the binder was reprinted. I ask her to provide the original version of the manual from November 2023. She says the original version is archived. I ask where. She says it is stored digitally on the management company server. I ask the president if the board can produce the archived manual. He says he will request it from the management company and provide it at a later date. I say that is not acceptable because the hearing is happening now and I have a right to review the policy that is being used to justify the charges. The president looks uncomfortable. He says the board will take my objection under advisement. I move to the next charge, obstruction of enforcement. I say this charge is based on my refusal to allow the tow to proceed. I argue that I had no legal obligation to allow the tow because the authorization was defective and the tow driver agreed. Nancy interrupts and says I interfered with HOA operations and created a hostile environment. I ask her to define hostile environment. She says I raised my voice and used aggressive body language. I ask her if she has video evidence of this. She says she has video. She pulls a tablet from the file cart and plays a clip. The clip shows me standing in my driveway with my arms crossed. My voice is calm. I am asking the tow driver to show me the authorization. The clip ends. I ask Nancy if that is the full video. She says it is the relevant portion. I ask her if she has the full unedited video. She says the full video is not necessary. I ask the president if the board will require Nancy to produce the full video. He says the board will review the video in executive session and make a determination. I move to the third charge, failure to maintain portal compliance. I say this charge is fabricated because I have been unable to access the portal for the last 3 days. I show the email suspension notice. I say the suspension was issued by Nancy in retaliation for my records request. Nancy interrupts and says the suspension was issued for security reasons. I ask her what security reasons. She says my account showed suspicious login activity. I ask her to provide the login logs. She says the logs are confidential. I ask the president if the board has reviewed the login logs. He says the board trusts Nancy's judgment on security matters. I say that is not an answer. I ask him again if the board has reviewed the logs. He says he has not personally reviewed them, but he is confident Nancy acted appropriately. I take a breath. I know I am losing. The board is going to vote to uphold the fines no matter what I say. But I have one more card to play and I am not playing it here. I swallowed my anger because I knew the moment to use it was coming. I close the binder and say I am requesting a continuance so I can obtain legal counsel and subpoena the documents the board is refusing to provide. The president says the board does not grant continuances for hearings. I ask him to cite the bylaw that prohibits continuances. He looks at Nancy. She flips through a binder and reads a section aloud. Hearings must be completed within 30 days of the notice date. Continuances are granted only for medical emergencies or military deployment. I ask her what section that is. She says section 9.4. I ask to see the binder. She hands it to me. I flip to section 9.4. The section says hearings must be completed within 60 days, and continuances may be granted for good cause. I point to the section and ask Nancy why she misquoted it. She says she was paraphrasing. I ask the president if he will grant a continuance based on the actual bylaw language. He says he will take it under advisement and the board will vote. The board goes into a huddle. They whisper for 2 minutes. Then the president announces the vote. The motion to grant a continuance fails 3-2. The hearing will proceed. I sit down. The president asks if I have anything else to say. I say I do. I stand and say I am putting the board on notice that I will be filing a complaint with the Washington State Attorney General for HOA fraud, and I will be filing a motion in small claims court to dismiss these charges and recover my costs. Nancy laughs. She says I can file whatever I want, but the board's decision is final, and if I do not pay the fines, a lien will be filed against my property. I say we will see. The board votes. The motion to uphold all 3 charges passes 4-1. The treasurer votes no. The fine is $1,200. I have 30 days to pay, or the fine doubles and a lien is filed. The president adjourns the meeting. Nancy wheels the file cart toward the exit. I follow her outside. I wait until we are in the parking lot, and then I say her name. She stops and turns. I say I know what she is doing. I know she is backdating documents and creating violations after the fact. I know she suspended my portal access to cover her tracks. I know she has done this to other people, and I am going to prove it. She smiles. Smile, I am documenting this for the file. She pulls out the camera and aims it at me. I stay calm. I say she can document whatever she wants, but it will not change the fact that I have evidence and I am going to use it. She lowers the camera and steps closer. She says evidence does not matter if no one believes me. She says the board trusts her and the management company trusts her, and I am just another whiner who does not want to follow the rules. She says I should pay the fine and move on before I make things worse for myself. I say I am not paying. She wheels the file cart to her car and loads it into the trunk. I watch her drive away. Then I go home and call Angela. I tell her what happened at the hearing. She says it went exactly as she expected. She says the next step is to file in small claims court and request a subpoena for the portal logs and the enforcement manual archives. She says the filing fee is $35 and I can represent myself if I cannot afford her hourly rate. She says she will email me a template for the complaint and a list of documents to request. I thank her and hang up. Then I sit down and write the complaint. I list every charge, every defect in the evidence, every inconsistency in Nancy's story. I attach photos of every document I have. I attach the email suspension notice. I attach the hearing transcript I recorded on my phone. I attach Carla's documents and Frank's statement. I print it all and drive to the courthouse. I file the complaint and pay the $35 fee. The clerk stamps it and hands me a copy. The hearing is scheduled for 3 weeks from now. The next morning I get a call from Greg at the management company. He says the board has reviewed my small claims filing and they are prepared to offer a settlement. I ask him what the settlement is. He says the board will reduce the fine to $300 if I withdraw the complaint. I ask him if the board will expunge the violations from my record. He says the violations will remain on record, but the fine will be reduced. I say no. He pauses. He says the board is trying to be reasonable, and I should consider the offer carefully. I say I am not interested in a settlement unless the board admits the violations were fabricated and expunges them from my record. He says the board will not admit wrongdoing. I say then we will see each other in court. I hang up. 2 days later, I get a certified letter from an attorney representing the HOA. The letter says I am in violation of the HOA's anti-harassment policy, and if I continue to contact board members or make defamatory statements, I will be subject to additional fines and possible legal action. The letter cites 3 incidents: my conversation with Nancy in the parking lot, my door-to-door interviews with neighbors, and my small claims filing. I call Angela and read her the letter. She laughs. She says the letter is a scare tactic and it has no legal basis. She says HOA anti-harassment policies do not apply to residents exercising their legal rights to gather evidence or file complaints. She says I should ignore the letter and proceed with the case. I ask her if the attorney can sue me. She says the attorney can file a lawsuit, but it will be dismissed immediately and the HOA will be liable for my legal fees. I ask her to put that in writing. She emails me a short response letter addressed to the HOA's attorney. The letter says I am acting within my rights, and any attempt to interfere with my legal case will result in a counterclaim for harassment and abusive process. I print the letter and mail it certified. The next week is quiet. I go to work, I come home, I check my mail, nothing. Then on Friday, I get a call from Diane at the management company. She says she is calling off the record. She says she needs to tell me something, but she cannot put it in writing. I ask her what it is. She says the management company received a records request from my attorney for the portal logs and the enforcement manual archives. She says the board instructed the management company to deny the request and delete the logs. I ask her if the management company complied. She says they did not delete the logs, but they told the board they did. She says the logs are still on the server and she has access to them. I ask her why she is telling me this. She says she has worked with HOAs for 15 years and she has never seen one as corrupt as Willow Creek Estates. She says Nancy has been running this scheme since she became board secretary, and the board knows about it, but they let it happen because it generates revenue. She says the logs will prove that Nancy has been backdating documents and deleting portal notifications for years. She says if I want the logs, I need to subpoena them before the board realizes the management company still has them. I ask her if she is willing to testify. She says she cannot testify without losing her job, but she will provide the logs if I subpoena them. I thank her and call Angela. Angela says she will file an emergency motion for a subpoena and request a court order to preserve the logs. She files it that afternoon. The judge grants it the next morning. On Monday, a deputy serves the management company with the subpoena and the preservation order. Greg calls me that afternoon. He sounds furious. He says the board is accusing the management company of colluding with me, and they are threatening to terminate the management contract. I say that is not my problem. He says the board is demanding that the management company provide a copy of the logs to the board before they release them to me. I say that is not legal, and if the board tampers with the logs, they will be in contempt of court. He says he knows, but the board is not listening. He says he is going to release the logs to my attorney today, and if the board retaliates, he will file a complaint with the state. I thank him and hang up. Angela receives the logs that evening. She calls me and says I need to see this. She emails me a PDF. The PDF is a portal activity log covering the last 3 years. The log shows every document upload, every policy revision, every email notification, and every user login. I scroll through it. The first thing I notice is that Nancy's admin account has edited the parking addendum 17 times in the last 2 years. The second thing I notice is that every edit was made after a violation was issued. The third thing I notice is that Nancy's account has deleted over 50 email notifications in the last year. The notifications were all policy updates. None of them were sent to residents. I keep scrolling. I find my account. The log shows my portal access was suspended on the same day I submitted the records request. The suspension was issued by Nancy's admin account. The log shows Nancy opened my records request, read it, and then suspended my account 14 minutes later. I take screenshots of everything. Angela calls me again the next morning. She says the logs are smoking gun evidence and she is going to file an amended complaint, adding fraud and breach of fiduciary duty. She says the board is liable for damages and I can sue for reimbursement of all fines, legal fees, and emotional distress. I ask her how much. She says it depends on how many other residents were affected, but based on what I have shown her, the damages could be in the tens of thousands. She says I should reach out to every resident who has been fined in the last 2 years and offer to share the logs. I say I will. I spend the next 2 days knocking on doors. I find 12 residents who were fined in the last 2 years. 8 of them paid the fines. 4 of them are still fighting. All of them agree to join the complaint. We form a group and pool our documents. Frank becomes the organizer. He sets up a shared folder and we upload every hearing notice, every violation letter, every email, and every receipt. Angela reviews it all and says we have a class action case. She says she will file it in district court and request an injunction to freeze all HOA enforcement actions until the case is resolved. She files it the next week. The judge grants the injunction. Nancy loses access to the portal admin tools. The board issues a statement saying the allegations are baseless and they will fight the case vigorously. Angela responds with a press release listing every violation and every falsified document. The local news picks it up. A reporter calls me and asks for an interview. I agree. The interview airs 2 days later. The reporter stands in front of the Willow Creek Estates sign and summarizes the case. She interviews me, Frank, and Carla. She interviews Diane off camera. Diane confirms that the management company was instructed to delete the logs. She confirms that Nancy has been editing documents after the fact. She confirms that the board knew about it. The story goes viral. The board receives over 300 complaint emails in one day. The management company terminates the contract. The board scrambles to find a new management company, but no one will take the contract. The HOA is functionally paralyzed. 2 weeks later, Nancy resigns. She sends an email to all residents saying she is stepping down for personal reasons. She does not apologize. She does not admit wrongdoing. She just leaves. The board votes to appoint an interim secretary. The interim secretary is the treasurer who voted no at my hearing. She immediately suspends all enforcement actions and launches an internal audit. The audit confirms everything we alleged. The board votes to reverse every fine issued in the last 2 years and refund all payments. They vote to expunge all violations from resident records. They vote to adopt new policies requiring independent review of all enforcement actions. They vote to ban surprise inspections and require written notice and a cure checklist. The outcome is everything I wanted. The small claims hearing happens 3 weeks later. Nancy does not attend. Her attorney shows up and files a motion to dismiss. The judge denies it. The judge reviews the portal logs and the amended complaint. He rules in my favor. He orders the HOA to pay my filing fees, my attorney fees, and $500 in damages for emotional distress. The HOA loses in small claims and pays costs. The attorney tries to argue that the board acted in good faith. The judge cuts him off. He says the evidence shows a pattern of deliberate fraud, and the board is lucky they are not facing criminal charges. He issues a written order and hands a copy to the attorney. The attorney leaves without saying a word. I walk out of the courthouse with Angela. She tells me the class action case will take longer, but the outcome is almost certain. She says the HOA will be forced to pay restitution to every affected resident, and the board members may be personally liable. She says I should prepare for a settlement offer. I ask her what I should do if they offer a settlement. She says I should take it if the amount is fair. She says fighting the case to the end will cost more in legal fees than I will recover. I tell her I will think about it. The settlement offer comes 2 weeks later. The HOA offers to pay each affected resident $1,500 plus full reimbursement of fines and legal fees. The total payout is over $80,000. Angela says it is a good offer and I should accept it. I talk to Frank and Carla. They both agree. We vote as a group and we accept. The settlement is finalized in 30 days. I receive a check for $2,200. I deposit it and use it to pay off my credit card. The new board calls a meeting to discuss reforms. I attend. The clubhouse is packed. The new board president is a retired engineer named Tom. He stands at the front and apologizes on behalf of the board. He says the previous board failed in their fiduciary duty and allowed Nancy to abuse her position. He says the new board is committed to transparency and accountability. He says the new policies will include mandatory training for all board members, quarterly audits of enforcement actions, and a resident oversight committee. He says the board will publish all meeting minutes and financial reports on the portal, and residents will have the right to challenge any enforcement action without fear of retaliation. He asks for questions. Frank stands and asks how the board will prevent another Nancy. Tom says the new bylaws will require all enforcement actions to be approved by a majority vote of the board, and any board member who falsifies a document will be immediately removed and referred for prosecution. The room applauds. Carla stands and asks what happened to the rolling file cart. Tom smiles. He says the file cart was donated to a local nonprofit. He says the new board will use a digital case management system, and all documents will be time-stamped and archived. He says residents will have access to their own enforcement files through the portal. The room applauds again. I stand and ask if the board will issue a public censure of Nancy. Tom pauses. He says the board discussed it, and they decided that a public censure motion read aloud while Karen tries and fails to interrupt is the appropriate consequence. I ask him what he means. He says Nancy attended the last board meeting and tried to defend her actions. He says she was given 3 minutes to speak. He says she started by saying the accusations were lies and the residents were ungrateful. He says the board let her finish, and then they read a formal censure motion listing every violation of fiduciary duty. He says Nancy tried to interrupt multiple times. He says the board refused to recognize her and completed the reading. He says the motion passed unanimously and Nancy was escorted out by security. The room erupts in applause. I sit down. The meeting ends an hour later. I walk out with Frank and Carla. We stand in the parking lot and talk about what happened. Frank says he never thought they would actually hold Nancy accountable. Carla says she is just glad it is over. I say I am too. Frank asks me what I am going to do with the settlement money. I say I am going to save it and maybe take a vacation. He laughs and says I earned it. I go home and sit on my couch. I think about the last 2 months. I think about the tow truck in my driveway. I think about Nancy with her file cart and her camera. I think about the hearing and the small claims case and the portal logs. I think about the moment I decided to fight back. I think about the moment I realized I could win. I think about the moment I did win. It feels good. The funny karma beat happens a week later. I am checking my mail and I see a certified letter addressed to Nancy at her old address. The letter is from the HOA's insurance company. I do not open it, but I can see through the envelope window. The letter says the insurance company has completed its review of the fraud allegations and they are denying coverage for the settlement. The letter says Nancy is personally liable for her share of the damages. The letter says the insurance company is terminating the HOA's policy effective immediately. I take a photo and send it to Angela. She replies with a laughing emoji and says it is about safety, and the insurer email says stop. I laugh and put the letter back in the mailbox. A month later, I run into the gate technician at the grocery store. He recognizes me and waves. He comes over and asks how things turned out. I tell him the short version. He nods and says he is not surprised. He says he worked for the HOA for 2 years and he quit because Nancy kept making up maintenance violations to justify emergency service calls. He says she would call him out for gate repairs that did not exist and then charge the HOA for the service. He says he refused to participate and she got him fired. He says he reported her to the management company, but they did nothing. I ask him if he would be willing to testify if it comes to that. He says he already did. He says Angela contacted him and he gave a statement. He says Nancy is facing a separate fraud investigation by the county. I thank him and we shake hands. The investigation concludes 3 months later. Nancy is charged with fraud and theft. The county prosecutor says she embezzled over $30,000 from the HOA over 4 years by creating fake vendor invoices and pocketing the payments. The case goes to trial. Nancy pleads no contest. She is sentenced to 2 years probation and ordered to pay full restitution. She loses her job and her reputation. She moves out of Spokane. I never see her again. The new board settles into a routine. Enforcement actions drop by 70%. The portal works. Meetings are civil. People stop complaining. The neighborhood feels normal again. I stay involved. I join the oversight committee. I review enforcement files and make sure everything is documented properly. It is boring work, but it matters. I think about what I learned. I learned that HOAs are only as good as the people running them. I learned that one bad actor can cause chaos if no one stops them. I learned that most people do not fight back because fighting back is exhausting and expensive and uncertain. I learned that I fought back because I had to. I learned that I won because I refused to quit. I learned that winning feels better than I expected, but it does not erase the damage. I learned that Nancy hurt a lot of people, and some of them will never get their money back or their peace of mind. I learned that justice is slow and incomplete, but it is better than nothing. I am still living in Willow Creek Estates. I still park front end. No one has said a word. I hope you have a great day.